Hello and welcome to Research Matters podcast. Today Aishwarya Viswamitra, will give you a summary of science stories that were published during the week on Research Matters. In your weekly dose of Indian science news today, I cover stories on government initiatives, ecology, cell biology, and health. Cylinders in your home and be able to cook on stoves that don't smoke up the kitchen, many people aren't as fortunate. They use wood and cattle dung instead. But statistics show that such smoke-filled kitchens took the lives of 1.2 lakh people in 2015. So, in 2016, the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana was introduced. Through this scheme, poor households are assisted in switching to alternative, cleaner cooking fuels like liquefied petroleum gas or LPG. How does it work? For the first LPG connection, the government pays half the cost, which covers the security deposit, pressure regulator, Suraksha hose, and demonstration charges. Then, the beneficiary pays the other half for a cooking stove and an LPG cylinder. They could also loan the second half from oil marketing companies. Though the scheme definitely looks attractive, was it actually successful? When a family enrolled for the Ujjwala program, did they actually buy LPG cylinders and use them? That is what a study published by researchers from Canada, Austria, and the USA aimed to find. In the Koppal district in Karnataka, the researchers compared the number of PMUY beneficiaries, LPG purchases, and LPG consumption rates. They found that the scheme saw an increase in the number of enrollments for LPG connections, but somehow a decrease in the number of new general consumers. That's weird. There might be two factors contributing to this trend. Either certain general consumers who were also eligible for the PMUY scheme took undue advantage by enrolling with the scheme rather than buying a general connection. Or certain general consumers chose to wait before buying an LPG connection because they wanted to be included in the PMUY slab first. Either way, the study found that the enrollment did not translate to actual LPG use. General LPG consumers had almost 2 times more LPG refills than Ujjwala beneficiaries. Even among the general users, the total LPG consumption was low enough to suggest that LPG was being used as a secondary fuel. So what's stopping people from using LPG as the primary fuel source? By tracking LPG sales for 5 years among rural consumers, the researchers found that LPG price, subsidy amount, LPG distributors, and climatic conditions were strong determinants of LPG consumption within the household. For example, during the dry part of the year, when wood and material to build a fire is easily available, LPG use plummeted. The researchers suggest that seasonal vouchers or other incentives must be provided to all consumers to increase LPG sales within the rural community. However, there is no one-shot solution to this problem. Researchers stress the need for pilot experiments to monitor how different solutions work. You must have heard of the bushfires in Australia and that the Victoria Falls are on the verge of drying up. Climate change is here and it is now, and its effects are being seen world over. Back in our very own country, freshwater sources are being depleted along India's coast, and salt water from the sea is finding its way into local aquifers through a process called seawater intrusion. Researchers at Anna University, Chennai, used a decade of data from a water resource information system on groundwater levels. They found that the coastal regions of Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh are greatly affected by seawater intrusion because the groundwater level was below the mean seawater level. The extent of seawater intrusion along the east coast was higher compared to the west coast, as the east coast is at a lower altitude, making Chennai the most affected city. What does all of this mean? The researchers say that if the current trend continues, climate change and sea level rise will make the groundwater unusable due to an increase in seawater intrusion. As water demand increases exponentially due to population growth and unchecked development along the coasts, this threat needs to be tackled immediately. The researchers believe that the most efficient approach would be to allow for increasing groundwater recharge via permeable pavements in percolation ponds, which store rainwater and recharge the subsurface water. With 1.3 billion people, India is the second most populous country in the world. When it comes to health, India has failed to provide accessible healthcare to this massive population. Statistics back this up. Malnutrition, for example, is rampant, with 14.5% of the population undernourished and 51.4% women in the reproductive years anemic. Studies conducted by the World Health Organization nearly 15 years ago reported a mortality rate of 10 to 20% in children with severe acute malnutrition. However, an international team of researchers have shown in a recent study that the mortality rate is actually a fraction of the WHO estimates. Since the mortality rates in India by WHO were calculated based on mortality rates in African nations, where diseases like AIDS are prevalent, the picture painted is not accurate. The researchers collected information about nearly 120,000 children and pregnant women who were in their final months of pregnancy, with the help of Anganwadi workers who work as part of the Rural Healthcare Initiative by the Indian government. The study, conducted in the impoverished states of Jharkhand and Orissa, showed the mortality rate to be in the range of 1.2%, as opposed to WHO's 10 to 20%. While the findings definitely give us hope, it does not refute the fact that malnutrition is a problem faced in our country. The WHO made several guidelines to curb this rate, one of which was providing ready-to-use therapeutic food to affected children. Although such foods are nutritionally rich and do not need refrigeration, they are extremely expensive. And it is not the only way out of malnutrition. The researchers believe that we must focus more on a holistic approach towards this problem by preventing diseases with adequate immunization, sanitation, and providing nutritious food. How many kinds of cells can you name? The neuron? A red blood cell? A muscle cell? Well, what makes the inside of these cells different? Within each specialized cell, there are a few spatial and functional differences that enable them to carry their functions. Cell polarity refers to these spatial differences within a cell, including the shape, size, or organization of the cellular components. But what causes it? Several interacting molecular and biochemical processes are vital to establishing cell polarity. In a recent study, researchers from the Indian Institute of Science, Bengaluru, studied some of the signals responsible for cell polarity by analyzing the centrosome of a single-celled C. elegans embryo. Centrosome gives a cell its structure by organizing microtubules, which are protein-based structures that extend throughout the cell, supporting it and keeping other organelles in place. It is known that the timing of polarity setup and the distance between the centrosome and the cell cortex, which is the inner part of the cell membrane, are correlated. Basically, the greater the distance, the longer it takes to establish polarity. Actomyosome-based contractions at the cell cortex are known to ensure that particular proteins called partition defect proteins are accurately distributed at the cell surface and are also responsible for establishing cell polarity. So two parts play a part: the centrosome and the contractions. The study found that Aurora A kinase, an enzyme involved in the addition of a phosphate group to proteins, was necessary for the maintenance of proper cortical tension and a single polarity axis. When its production was suppressed, abnormal progeny cells are formed. Since numerous molecular and biochemical processes occur in our cells continuously and in tandem, studying a single molecule or pathway within this tangled system paves the way for more in-depth research. Thank you for listening to this episode of Research Matters Podcast. See you next weekend. For more such science news and podcasts, please log on to www.researchmatters.in.